Project Habakkuk. During the darkest years of the Second World War, British military planners faced a growing crisis in the Atlantic, where German submarines were sinking supply ships faster than they could be replaced. One British inventor proposed an aircraft carrier built almost entirely from ice, reinforced with wood pulp to create a material strong enough to resist torpedoes and nearly impossible to sink through conventional means. This reinforced ice, later named pykrete, after the scientist who helped develop it, melted far slower than ordinary ice and could be repaired simply by pouring more slush into damaged sections. Engineers built a scaled-down test version on a lake in Canada, complete with an internal refrigeration system designed to keep the massive structure from melting even in warmer waters. Early results were promising enough that serious plans considered a full-sized vessel nearly a third of a kilometer long, dwarfing anything afloat at the time. Rising costs, shifting wartime priorities, and the sheer difficulty of maintaining a floating iceberg eventually ended the project before construction ever began in full. What makes it remarkable is how seriously an entire nation once considered fighting a war from the deck of a ship made of frozen water. RV Flip. Commissioned by the United States Navy in the 1960s, this unusual research vessel was designed to solve a very specific scientific problem: the need for an extremely stable platform to study ocean waves and underwater sound with minimal interference from surface motion. Its solution involved a design unlike almost any other ship afloat: a long, narrow hull that could be towed horizontally to a research site and then deliberately flooded at one end, causing the vessel to rotate 90 degrees and stand nearly vertical in the water. Once flipped, most of the ship sits submerged beneath the surface, leaving only a small section poking above the waves like a buoy, dramatically reducing the rocking motion that normally disrupts sensitive instruments. Crew quarters inside were built with furniture and fixtures mounted on rotating frames, allowing beds, tables, and even toilets to remain functional whether the ship is lying flat or standing upright. The entire flipping process takes around 28 minutes and requires no engine power, relying instead on gravity and carefully controlled ballast tanks. The Novgorod. Built by the Russian Empire in the 1870s, this warship abandoned the traditional elongated hull shape entirely in favor of a nearly perfect circle, an experiment driven by a desire to fit heavy armor and powerful guns into a design that could operate in shallow coastal waters. Engineers believed the round shape would provide a stable gun platform while requiring less draft than conventional warships of similar firepower, making it well suited for defending the shallow approaches near the mouth of key rivers. In practice, the unusual hull created serious handling problems, since the vessel struggled to hold a straight course and tended to spin in strong currents, sometimes taking far longer to turn than intended, even with multiple engines working against each other. Sailors reportedly joked about the ship's tendency to drift in circles regardless of how the rudder was set, undermining its usefulness in any situation requiring quick maneuvering. Despite these flaws, a second vessel of similar circular design was built before the Russian Navy abandoned the concept entirely, concluding that the shape simply could not overcome its fundamental steering limitations. What makes this ship stand out is how directly its greatest engineering ambition, breaking from centuries of hull design tradition, became the very flaw that doomed it. Knock Nevis. Originally constructed in the late 1970s and later extensively lengthened, this supertanker holds the record as the largest ship ever built by any measure of length or displacement, stretching longer than most of the world's tallest buildings laid on their side. Its scale was so extreme that it could not pass through the English Channel, the Suez Canal, or the Panama Canal, limiting its usable routes to only the widest and deepest stretches of open ocean. Carrying crude oil across long distances, the vessel required a draft so deep that it could only dock at a small number of ports, specifically capable of accommodating its enormous underwater profile. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the ship was struck by missiles and left partially sunk in the Persian Gulf, only to be salvaged, repaired, and returned to service years later under new ownership. Eventually converted into a floating storage and offloading unit rather than a traveling vessel, it spent its final years anchored permanently rather than sailing the routes it once dominated. What makes this ship remarkable is less about any single feature and more about pure scale, a vessel so large that ordinary maritime infrastructure simply could not accommodate it. The Vasa. Commissioned by the Swedish crown in the early 17th century, this heavily armed warship was intended to project naval power and prestige at a time when Sweden was expanding its influence across the Baltic region. Construction stretched across several years, during which the ship's design was repeatedly modified to add more decoration, more cannons, and greater height. Changes made without adjusting the ballast needed to keep such an increasingly top-heavy vessel stable. On its maiden voyage in 1628, having sailed barely more than a kilometer from the dock in front of a large crowd gathered to watch its departure, a moderate gust of wind was enough to tip the ship onto its side, flooding through open gun ports and sending it to the bottom of the harbor within minutes. An investigation following the disaster revealed that builders and officials had likely recognized stability problems before departure, but proceeded anyway under pressure to deliver the ship on schedule. The wreck remained remarkably preserved in the cold, low-oxygen waters of the harbor for more than 3 centuries, before being raised nearly intact in 1961. What makes this ship significant today is less its brief service and more its accidental preservation, offering one of the most complete surviving examples of 17th century shipbuilding anywhere in the world. NS Savannah. Launched in 1962 as part of a broader effort to demonstrate peaceful applications of nuclear technology, this vessel became the first nuclear-powered cargo and passenger ship built for civilian use rather than military purposes. Its reactor allowed the ship to travel enormous distances without refueling, a genuine technical achievement. Though the vessel was never designed with cargo efficiency as its primary goal, prioritizing instead a sleek, almost futuristic appearance meant to showcase nuclear power in a positive light. Passenger cabins were finished with considerable luxury for the era, reflecting its role as much as a traveling exhibition of atomic age optimism as a practical trading vessel. Operating costs proved far higher than conventional oil-powered ships, and many ports around the world hesitated to allow a nuclear-powered vessel to dock, limiting its usefulness on regular commercial routes. After roughly a decade of service, the ship was retired from active operation. Its reactor eventually defueled and the vessel preserved as a museum piece rather than scrapped. What makes it unusual is the gap between its ambition and its practicality. A ship built primarily to prove a technological point rather than to solve any real shipping problem. Spirit. Pioneering spirit. Completed in the 2000s and 10s, this vessel was purpose-built for one of the most demanding tasks in modern maritime engineering, lifting and installing entire offshore oil platforms and wind turbine foundations in a single operation. Rather than a single hull, the ship uses twin parallel hulls connected by a wide central deck, a configuration that provides exceptional stability for handling loads weighing tens of thousands of tons suspended between them. A massive lifting system extends between the hulls, capable of hoisting entire platform topsides directly off their support structures and transporting them to shore for decommissioning, a task that previously required disassembling structures piece by piece over many months. Its size ranks among the largest vessels ever constructed by overall length, though unlike a supertanker, its bulk exists specifically to provide lifting capacity rather than cargo space. The ship has also been used to install offshore wind turbine foundations by driving massive support piles directly into the seabed, adapting its heavy lifting capability to renewable energy infrastructure. What distinguishes this vessel from more traditional ships is its function. Built not primarily to transport goods across oceans, but to lift and place some of the heaviest man-made objects on Earth with a precision closer to construction equipment than conventional shipping. The Turtle. Built in 1775 during the early stages of the American Revolutionary War, this small vessel is widely credited as the first submarine ever used in actual combat operations. Shaped roughly like 2 turtle shells joined together, the wooden craft was barely large enough to fit a single operator, who powered it entirely through hand-cranked propellers while submerged beneath the surface of New York Harbor. Its intended method of attack involved approaching an anchored enemy ship undetected, then using a hand-operated drill to attach an explosive charge to the vessel's wooden hull before retreating to a safe distance. During its only recorded combat attempt, the operator struggled to bore through a metal-reinforced section of the target ship's hull, and was ultimately forced to abandon the mission before detonating the charge. Despite this failure, the attempt demonstrated that a submerged vessel could realistically approach an enemy target unseen, a concept that would take more than a century to fully mature into practical military use. What makes this vessel significant is not its success, but its timing, an almost absurdly primitive craft that nonetheless proved the basic concept behind an entire category of warfare still in use today.